Here for day 2. Got it. We're being recorded. And we're excited to kind of dive in today. We're going to be starting off with screening, but we're going to kind of just do some quick high-level housekeeping first. If you want to go to the next slide, Karina. This is a presentation made possible through OJJDP's Office of Juvenile Justice and Delinquency Prevention from the National Mentoring Resource Center. So we're excited to be able to offer this training, and you'll see the branding throughout because it is important to acknowledge the huge investment OJJDP makes in the mentoring field. Most of the folks on this call today, I believe, may be OJJDP grantees. There are some that are not, so you'll hear some reference to OJJDP in particular, just so everyone knows. Next slide. So here is the vision of OJJDP. We want to make sure that our children are free from crime and violence. They come into contact with the justice system. The contact should be both just and beneficial to them. So the key components really of the National Mentoring Resource Center is, first of all, the availability of training and technical assistance at no cost to each of you that are on this call. There's research-based practices. There's a research board that dives in deep on all kinds of mentoring practices, as well as the website itself is a huge resource for folks. There's blogs, grantee dedicated part of the site. There's so many vetted resources as far as research. So as you're applying for more grants, you can kind of dive in there and pull out some great statistics and evidence reviews on programs, models, and populations. What can you best do to serve different populations? Look at all the people popping into the chat still. I love this. Next slide. Mentor National, the lovely folks that you see with the infrastructure of a heart behind them are our folks from Mentor National, and Mentor is the unifying champion for mentoring, the thought and practice leader. Right now, we are working over the 4th elements of effective practice for mentoring, and we in Rhode Island are one of 24 state and local affiliates of Mentor. So we have access to all the best practices and all types of resources that we get to share with our local folks, and now nationally as well through trainings like today's. Make sure that you participate. If you come off camera on occasion, that would be lovely. We love to see your bright, shiny faces. We also encourage you to really dive in, chat as we go, and remember that we will send you out all these materials after the session. So you'll have access to that as well as the recording. And I am, drum roll please, sorry, Joanne Schofield, CEO of Mentor Rhode Island. So we are unique in the field of Mentor National affiliates because we do also run mentoring programs. I am what you would call a veteran or an OG. I've been on staff here at what is now Mentor Rhode Island for 25 years. I started as a program assistant to a local mentoring program that we run in the local schools. So whatever questions you have, I may have already encountered that in the last 25 years. So please don't hesitate to ask questions. And again, been there, done that. We've seen the cycles of programs as they start, as they really fully develop, and then sometimes as they ebb. So been there, done that, and please use us as a resource. Christopher.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Krista Margadata. I'm the Director of Training and Engagement here at Mentor Rhode Island. Again, excited to be with you all today on our second day of this training. For those of you here yesterday, happy to see you again. For those of you who weren't, you missed out on a great time, but happy that you're here today. So excited to get into it, and hopefully my internet's a little better today. But we are a nonprofit, so you can never quite know.
We did upgrade, just so you know, we paid for the upgrade. All righty, so in the elements of effective practice is recruitment, which we covered yesterday. Today is screening and training. Tomorrow will be matching, monitoring and support, and closure. There's also a great section towards the back on program management, which all of these pieces fall under program management, but there's a lot of other things to think about too. So by all means, dig into this as a resource for you and your mentoring program. Those of us that provide technical assistance will use this as a blueprint in helping you decide on what different components you might need extra help on and those kinds of things. We also have supplements related to STEM mentoring, peer and group mentoring models, e-mentoring, LGBTQ youth, all kinds of different things. So we realize that not every mentoring program is the same, and depending on the focus, we have more information for you. And the training disclaimer: this training should not be viewed as the rendering of legal advice, and programs are strongly encouraged to consult their legal counsel and state local laws prior to implementing the recommendations from this training. I am not an attorney and I do not play one on TV. So here we go, screening. So special conditions and the elements. So special conditions are really consistent with the guidance offered in the elements. They're specific about types of criterion or offenses that should disqualify candidates. So there's some mandatory things that would automatically disqualify folks for programs, especially underneath the Office of Juvenile Justice and Delinquency Prevention guidance, which is available at the link that's on the screen. Again, you'll be getting the slide deck. So if you have a question about whether or not a mentor is actually eligible to mentor in your program, you would have to check with your program manager if you're an OJJDP grantee. And there's also all kinds of recommendations within the elements. So there's no other way to do this but to quickly read these to you all, then we'll do a deeper dive. So there's two things in the elements: benchmarks and enhancements. So these benchmarks are what you should be doing. You need to do these. So your program has established criteria for accepting mentors into the program, as well as criteria for disqualifying mentors. Prospective mentors complete a written application that includes questions designed to help assess their safety and suitability for mentoring a youth. Program conducts at least one face-to-face interview with each prospective mentor that includes questions designed to help the program assess his or her suitability for mentoring a youth. Program conducts a comprehensive criminal background check on prospective adult mentors, including searching a national criminal records database along with sex offender and child abuse registries, and when relevant, driving records. And if you are an OJJDP grantee, you should also include a child abuse and neglect screening as well, getting that information. Next one, sorry. Program conducts reference check interviews with multiple adults who know an applicant, ideally both personal and professional. That includes questions to help assess his or her suitability for mentoring a youth. Prospective mentors agree in writing to a 1-year, calendar or school year minimum commitment for the mentoring relationship, or minimum time commitment that's pertinent to your program. Prospective mentors agree in writing to participate in face-to-face meetings with their mentees that average a minimum of once a week and total of 4 or more hours per month over the course of the relationship, at a minimum frequency and amount of hours that are required by your mentoring program. Program has established, now this is for mentees. We just talked about mentors, so this is on mentees. You have established criteria for accepting youth into the program, as well as criteria that would disqualify a potential youth participant. Parents or guardians complete an application or referral form. Parents or guardians provide informed permission for their child to participate. And parents and guardians and mentees agree in writing to a 1-year, calendar or school year, minimum commitment for the mentoring relationship, or the minimum time commitment that is required by your mentoring program. Parents, guardians, and mentees agree in writing that mentees participate in face-to-face meetings with their mentors that average a minimum of once a week and a total of 4 or more hours per month over the course of the relationship, or at a minimum frequency and amount of hours that are required by your mentoring program. Now we're on to enhancements. So these are nice to haves, not need to have. So we already covered the need to have. These are the nice to haves. Your program utilizes a national fingerprint-based FBI criminal background check. We would argue that might be a need to have. Program conducts at least one home visit of each prospective mentor, especially when the match may be meeting in the mentor's home. Program conducts comprehensive criminal background checks on all adults living in the home of prospective mentors, including searches of a national criminal records database, along with sex offender and child abuse registries when the match may meet at the mentors' homes. I might also add that this is really based on community-based mentoring. So if you have a school-based program or a site-based program, the need to visit a mentor's home is probably eliminated in that case. The school-based programs assess mentors' interest in maintaining contact with their mentees during the summer months following the close of the academic school year and offer assistance to matches in maintaining contact. We're finding that, especially with COVID, when we had to come up with other ways of our face-to-face mentors meeting, that if we have some other form in place, that will actually help extend out that relationship, perhaps over the summer months. Programs that utilize adult mentors prioritize accepting mentor applicants who are older than college age. Program uses evidence-based screening tools and practices to identify individuals who have attitudes and beliefs that support safe and effective mentoring relationship. Mentees complete an application, either written or verbally, and mentees provide written assent agreeing to participate in their mentoring program. So by the end of today, you will be able to summarize the screening benchmarks for mentors and mentees, identify screening practices to determine if your mentor applicants will have the time, commitment, and personal qualities to effectively mentor, list the key components of a comprehensive criminal background check process, translate screening requirements to their program setting, apply the screening standard from the 4th edition of the Elements of Effective Practice to your program practices. Phew, there'll be a test. No, not a test. So why do we screen, right? So we screen because we obviously want to have our kids to be safe. So a program needs to provide due diligence, taking any reasonable and necessary steps to ensure that the correct course of action is offered or taken in its screening process. Obviously, you want to keep kids safe. You want to make sure mentors have a great experience. So there's lots of reasons why we screen. And obviously, screening reduces risks, right? So identifying those youth who would create an unacceptable risk given unsupervised, I'm sorry, I messed that up on you. Identifying those who would create an unacceptable risk given unsupervised access to youth. Unfortunately, we know that there's pedophiles out there. We need to protect our young people. Preventing placement of individuals who lack time, judgment, or necessary skills and attitudes. Reducing liability exposure, which, yes, that's a risk management thing, and we have insurances in place to cover that, but it really isn't about protecting our organization against liability as much as it is protecting our young people to make sure that they're safe. We also want to rule out potentially dangerous individuals with a history of violent or exploitative behavior. So right now, I want to get you all involved, and in the chat, oh, I'm sorry, I'm gonna just read this one more screen. Unsafe applicants are wondering what the agency's screening process is, right? They're assessing like, okay, well, how am I gonna be screened? What are the demographics of the children served? How many staff members are dedicated to monitoring the match? How often will they be following up with me? How often will we be following up with mentees too? That also should be considered. When will the monitoring end? And do I really need to meet with my mentee every week? We know that there's folks out there that try to groom young people, and we want to make sure that we are assessing our screening process at every interval to make sure that unsafe applicants are not able to kind of permeate our process. All right, next one. So obviously we want to make sure that our mentors are suitable, but we also want to make sure that they have the ability to commit to this, right? We want a one-year relationship for a young person. So let's see the next slide. So here I want everybody to jump into the chat and write what suitability means for your program. Think about your ideal mentor. What would that ideal mentor perhaps look like? What are some of the traits that they might have? So go ahead and pop into the chat. What does an ideal mentor look like in your program? empathic, but ultimately stable, reliable, committed, absolutely not dangerous or volatile, correct? Compassionate, experience with youth. Ideal mentor is a caring adult who's committed, has time to share, willing to give, and nurturing. An individual 30 plus who is already involved in the community and wants to support providing educational and professional access to young people. Kind, open mind, sense of humor. Oh my goodness, we don't have a sense of humor when we're working with our young people. We are in trouble, aren't we? Temperament is key. I agree, Brittany. Consistent and mature. These are all fabulous. Thank you so much for chiming in. Works well with diverse populations. Yes. Okay, great. Thank you all for chiming in on that. Let's go to the next slide. So when we screen, we're going to be screening to discover how a mentor will actually act in or react to in different situations. How will they deal with adversity? How do they manage conflict? How do they manage their time or solve problems, right? What's your approach to communication? Is it more of an authoritative approach or is it more of a collaborative approach? How do they manage stress, adapting to new situations? And there's probably lots of other things based on your individual program model that you might want to consider. I like patience, maturity, and reliability that Thomas just put in. All right, next slide. So let's talk about what this comprehensive screening process actually looks like for us. So there's 8 steps. And what you will learn is that screening actually never stops, right? So we start with an orientation session. Maybe you did one of those great recruitment pitches that we worked on yesterday, where you're out in public and giving an orientation session and get to know a couple of folks that way. With the application packet, what they actually fill out on their application, a formal interview and what those reference checks say. You know, some people say, well, why would a reference check ever come back bad? Why would you give somebody that's going to give you a bad reference? We've experienced that. So, you know, again, it's an important part of the process. Criminal history record checks. The FBI background check is highly recommended. And interpreting the results of those record checks, right? What do they mean? We had some conversation a little bit earlier about, you know, what might be a disqualifier and those kinds of things. So additional screening mechanisms that we also can put in place, pre-match training and moving toward the match. So that pre-match training, you really get to know individuals by the way they react to some of the topics and those kinds of things. We'll talk about that a little bit more when we get to the training session. And obviously match supervision as well, because you're going to be learning more about match support, how often we interact with our mentors and mentees will also give us an idea of how we how that match is going, if we think that that youth might be in any type of dangerous situation or in a situation that might not be suitable. So again, that process never stops. It starts at the beginning and continues as long as that match is part of our program. Next slide. Arlene McNulty, hi. Former CEO of Mentor Rhode Island.
Hello.
This is a
nice
national audience.
Sorry to interrupt. I'm really sorry.
So we're going to work together and review the elements, benchmarks, and enhancements. And I know that Mel put that in the chat earlier. I don't know if we need to redrop that in now. Perfect. Thank you. So we're going to be taking a peek at those. And we're going to chart a list of the practices and tools that that you see in that checklist around screening for mentors and mentees. And then note why or why not you may include one or more of the enhancements. Like, yes, that's a great one to include, or no, we wouldn't include that because. And so what we're going to do for this particular thing is to use Jamboard. So we're going to also place that Jamboard link in the chat. Yay, thank you. So if we go to the Jamboard, you will be looking at that elements benchmarks and just writing some of those enhancements and why you might use it or why you might not use it. We're going to take a good 5 minutes to give you some time to look at that, to really think about the things that you're currently using and see if there's any benchmarks that you would like to include or would definitely not include for whatever reason. And you can share that out with us.
One moment.
So as you're using the Jamboard, if you're unfamiliar with it, you'll click on the little sticky note option on the left and it'll drag out a little pop-up for you that you can type right into. You can even change the color of it. And then as it places on the Jamboard, you'll also want to then just click on that and drag it over to a different part of the Jamboard so that everything lands in the same place. So if you don't click on it and drag it somewhere else, then everything gets stacked straight up.
Are you able to see the Jamboard now?
Yes, thank you.
Awesome.
Oh, you can use Control-Shift+P and it will automatically come up with a note. I learned something new today. My day is complete. So again, we're looking at the enhancements and seeing what it is we may definitely want to use or may definitely not want to use. Enhancement 2.4, they would not use because they're not a school-based program. Perfect. Great. We conduct mentor interviews in their homes as mentors have the option of bringing their mentee to the home. That's great. You want to see what environment that young person is going to be included in, correct? Anything around the age recommendation there? Older than college students? Is that something your program definitely does or definitely does not do? The enhancement 2.3 is up in the air because of our target demographic, kids impacted by substance abuse. While we want mentors who have some lived experience in common with mentees, it may disqualify them as well. And that really varies program to program as far as what those disqualifiers might be. In Rhode Island, we have a couple of programs that we actually want to get credible messengers as our mentors. And that's a very special kind of a program as young people are being released from incarceration, to find somebody that has gone through a certain process and is at a certain level that can then engage with that young person as they transition back into the community. So you actually want someone with lived experience at that point. But again, what does that screening look like? That's another whole conversation, because you know that certain things will come back on that on that criminal history check record. Although we do not allow match to visit mentor's home, a mentor applicant home visit seems really beneficial to additional screening. And yes, we do prefer that mentees are out of college, but we'd consider someone in college after deeper interviews. One of the things that we've encountered with college mentors is that they might be really good for one semester, then all of a sudden their schedule changes for the next semester, depending on their class load. And that then might make it more difficult for that person to engage and continue the mentoring relationship. High school age mentees provide written assent. Excellent. Yes, I'm going to do this and I'm going to follow through. We have many college mentors since we partner closely with organizations at the local university. They're all aware of the requirements. Invite the mentor to visit a group. I love that. Right? Let's see how they interact with young people firsthand. Great. Anybody else? Anything else they want to add here? Oh, using college age mentors from fraternities. Great. For group mentoring. Yeah, and that's something that Christopher had talked about a little bit yesterday with recruitment, right? Like what that might look like for a group mentor versus an individual mentor. All right, great. So we really did a little bit of a dig in on those enhancements. And I hope you're all really thinking about how it all applies to your particular mentoring program. Let's go ahead and we're going to start to talk about informed intuition. Does anybody know what informed intuition is? You can unmute yourself and chime in. You can chat and put it in the chat. All right. Well, let me tell you what it is if we're being shy today. I'm just going for it. All right. So informed intuition is really that gut feeling, right? How many times in our lives have we been in a situation where we're saying, oh, I should have followed my gut, right? Because just, you get out of your head and into your body, and your body definitely reacts in certain ways around certain people, and why that would be a really great tool as you're screening your mentors. So how do you really use this informed intuition to know that an applicant may not be right for your program? And how do we really learn to follow our guts on that? This is actually based on a book. It's called Gut Feelings, The Intelligence of the Unconscious. And that's by Gerd, and I'm going to spell the last name is Gigerenzer. Maybe it's Gigerenzer. And so this is a complete practice that's been studied about following your gut. So let's go ahead to the next slide. So usually when we have that gut feeling, right, it happens quickly. Like you meet somebody and it's very, very quick that you have this gut feeling. And you really are not sure why. You don't know, should I act upon this? Should I not act upon this? But when we take that gut feeling and then kind of meld that with the other information that we know that we gather through our screening process, that's what we're talking about with informed intuition, how we can kind of take what we know from the application and screening process and what we feel in our tummies and meld those together to make good decisions for kids. Next slide. So obviously we need to do criminal history record checks, right? So part of this process is state records. So in Rhode Island, we actually are unable to access federal fingerprinted FBI background checks unless it's for a paid position. Volunteers do not have access to that. So we've had to do lots of other things in lieu of that. But definitely state criminal records. If you know the applicant has lived in multiple states, you should probably tap into those different states where you know that they've lived in the past. Any kind of national criminal records you have access to. The sex offender registry, the child abuse registries, as well as driving records when relevant, if a mentor is going to be transporting a child. So all of these things. I know that in the past, I don't know how difficult it is now, but using the sex offender registry in the past, sometimes you couldn't get information from every state when you went to pull the record. So you might have every state except for 2, but go ahead and print that out, because the next time you pull it, you still might not have every state, but you might have those 2. And then between the 2 of them, you'll meld them into a complete record. Yeah, so a lot of folks are using the Sterling background checks, which that's an additional expense, but that is definitely, you know, worth the investment to have consistency across. I love that. Yep, a couple of folks using the Sterling and IntelliCorp prior to that. Jen, was there a reason why you changed to Sterling, or just, was it a cost thing or a service thing? Sorry to put you on the spot. They're happy with both, but the cost of doing females with IntelliCorp is high. Thank you for sharing. I appreciate that insight. Next slide. Right, multiple last names. We're very right. Every time you get a different name, it was another cost. I get that. And Anthony just got screened by Sterling to be a youth soccer coach. Love that. So for your criminal history checks, the considerations, obviously you need to articulate your policies and procedures. They have to be in writing to back yourself up with all of your decisions that you make. You have to obtain written permission to do a background check. Obviously, you need to budget the funds, as everything costs money, whether it's a federal one, whether you're using Sterling or another service. And unfortunately, it does take a lot of time very often to do that. And keeping your prospective mentors in the loop as to how long that might take could probably help you with the retention process during that time period, because sometimes it does take quite a, you know, it could be a month or 2 sometimes before you gather all that information that you need. And making sure that you keep copies of all the documents and case notes for each applicant. Some things that are really confusing is sometimes the results can be really tricky to interpret. Like there'll be some code or something that you get back that you then have to do invest. I've had to look up more than one thing, right? Trying to figure out exactly, well, what does that mean? What does the offense mean? Is it really a misdemeanor? Is it something more to consider? Akeisha put in, hello, currently I am working at a school in a rural area and my connection is severe. Okay, sorry.
Program.
No worries. Some confusion points is that every state reports things a little differently. Not all crimes or convictions will appear on checks. I could have been accused of doing many bad things, but never been convicted of them. So you would have no way of knowing that on my background check, right? Because only people who have actually been convicted of a crime will have a record. So also very, very important for all of us to kind of take in all of this information and really try to sift through it and be consistent across the board with it. Next slide. Permanent disqualifiers. Obviously, anybody with a history of abuse of children, sexual or otherwise, conviction of any other crime in which children were involved, any history of extreme violence or sexually exploitive behavior, and termination from a paid or volunteer position because of misconduct with a child. That last bullet is really hard to determine, because very often if somebody did list another position, whether it was volunteer or paid, very often another agency will say, yes, that person volunteered, or no, that person didn't volunteer, but it would not give you any information whatsoever around disclosing any reasons why folks went their separate ways. So that's difficult to determine very often. It's really more or less just really digging in and asking lots of questions of your prospective applicant. So screening principles. One of the things that I really want to talk about a little bit is like really thinking about red flags, right? What are those red flags that we often encounter in this industry? So if you're talking to a prospective mentor and they seem like they're either very much like a recluse. They don't have a lot of peer relationships. They have a hard time coming up with folks to list as references. They're over-invested in children and youth, or maybe they overstate a problem with their child's family, those kinds of things. Any kinds of extreme behaviors or inappropriate behaviors, and being overly involved or overly eager, sometimes that's a red flag. And under involvement with other adults can also be a red flag. I think it's really important that our prospective mentors don't focus so much on what they're going to be getting out of it, right? Like what they need or what they think they can do to help or fix a child. We want to make sure that we really have folks that have a good sense of balance. And we added a lot of those qualifiers earlier, right? We want somebody that's mature and consistent and compassionate, all of those things. So your screening components, you have so much input, right? You have your written materials, which is your application and those kinds of things. You have your impressions of them, right? Your informed intuition. And sometimes our observations or our informed intuition could come through a lens of our own experience. So it's also really important, if you have some doubts, that you run it by somebody else on your team, whether it's a supervisor, if you have other people that you that are peers that you can run it by, to make sure that any implicit biases that you have are not kind of dating your decision, and to get that affirmation that you're all on the same page when it comes to screening volunteers. So it's really important that not only are we screening out people, but we're also screening in, right? We want them to be part of the organization and, give every folks the benefit of the doubt. But again, keeping all those other elements in play, making sure that we're making good decisions on behalf of our kids. And volunteers are different than employees, right? We have the legal right to reject or terminate anytime without really having a reason for that. So, keep that in mind, that yes, it's kind of difficult and awkward to say no, but you're much better at saying no and having a kiddo on the waiting list longer than having the wrong match or the wrong person in your program. And there really are no limitations on questions that we can ask from our volunteers. So if you have some questions, like you get some feedback that you want to dig in a little bit more, you can ask follow-up questions of that prospective mentor. And you really need every candidate to go through the same process, regardless of who referred them or their standing in the community. The mayor of your community wants to volunteer, that's great. They still get screened, they still get trained. We run a school-based mentoring program here near our home office in Warwick, Rhode Island, where the assistant superintendent volunteered back in August to become a mentor and had a hard time scheduling in his training. We have not matched until he came to the training last week, and now we're in the match process. So that's the same for everybody, right? Same things for everybody. We're consistent throughout. So we really want to make sure that everybody's application is completed, not halfway done, and so that everything is consistent, right? It's documented before the candidate is accepted. We want a final determination to be supported and respected by all staff. So whether you're saying yes or whether you're saying no, make sure we have consensus around that. And once the matched interactions must continue to be monitored, right? So we had an example here that there was a wonderful gentleman who I thought was wonderful at the time, who is participating in a school-based mentoring program. And although I really don't think that anything was inappropriate that was happening, he had his mentee on his lap and reading to him. It was like an 8-year-old boy. And a teacher walked by and saw it and was, and just obviously that was way too close. I might put my own folks, like my niece or my nephew or grandchild or a daughter or son, whatever, on my lap, but it's not appropriate for me to put somebody else's child on my lap. So because of that one instance, he was actually mentoring 3 different children at different schools. All of those relationships were terminated. So I think it's really important that we set our mentors up for success, reminding them of things around this continuous screening, right? If you're in at a site, you don't want to be in an enclosed space with doors closed. You always want to have them open. You want to make sure that there is not any inappropriate touch. In the sense of, you might think that it's not it's fine to give your mentee a hug, but you know, let's advise folks about that. Is it a high five? Is it like kind of an off to the side kind of a thing and whatnot? So keeping in mind that we're watching all of those interactions to make sure that kids are safe, because that is our top priority. Any questions on that? All right. So what mentor qualities are you looking and listening for in your process, right? I think that this would be a good time for us maybe to use the chat to see what would you tell an applicant that you are not, what would you tell to an applicant that you're not accepting, right? So what details would you include? So if you found somebody that you're just not going to match, let's chime in, and whether you want to speak or put it in the chat, what are the details that you would include in telling them no for your program? Because this is the hard part, right? What is your policy currently? What is it that you say to a mentor that is a no? Is it in writing? Is it a conversation? I love that. Thank you. It's in writing and a suggestion that they may be a better fit for another service opportunity. Tammy said it depends if the disqualifiers for record checks. They have to have access to that info, right? So it's almost like a credit report kind of a situation. Like if you get turned down for credit, they won't say you've got turned down for credit because of this on your credit report. They'll just say you're turned down for credit, check with the credit bureau. So it would be the same thing around something that came back on a criminal background check. You shouldn't tell them what you found, just that there was something there, and then they can do the follow-up. Yep, unfortunately, we're unable to accept you as a mentor at this time. I love that. Elisa, right, by email, not a good fit, and unfortunately will not be moving forward. We're looking for mentors that have strong skills in XYZ area and leave it open to a call or follow-up. Great. Yeah, I think that there has to be some kind of documentation for your record keeping, right? That you've closed that loop on that prospective mentor. Generally, we send out just a generic letter, but also make a phone call so they're expecting it. Additionally, a lot of times we recruit folks from local businesses. So if I've gotten recruited from Mentor Rhode Island, somebody came in and I signed up and then there's something on my background check, we call that individual applicant on their own, like, and let them know so that they can kind of say, oh, I changed my mind. So that way there's not any ramifications in the workplace because of that. Great. Yes. Establish a policy. Yes, yes. Yeah. A lot of times referring them to another agency to volunteer could be an easy way, you know. You hate to use the words not a good fit, but you know, we don't have a volunteer opportunity for you at this time. Is a little bit like, oh, well, will there be another time, right? You don't want to really say that. So you want to make sure that you're very explicit of, I like that, you know, we are unable to move forward. That really says a lot. Perfect. At this time, we do not feel you'd be a fit for our program. We wish you well on your volunteer search. Nick, I prefer to use match versus fit. Awesome. Thank you. Thank you for chiming in. I appreciate that. Great. So what other concerns or questions do you have that we haven't talked about so far? I will say that like in our agency, because we do direct service, on occasion, there's been somebody that maybe had something on their record when they were 18 or 19 and now they're 50. But that doesn't go away unless you have it expunged. So depending on what that might be, if it was something that was very small, I sometimes sign off on it. But if it was something that was more serious, we give them the opportunity to get that off of their record. And once it's expunged, it no longer shows up. It's like it never happened. Any questions? Anybody have a really difficult one that they wanted to run by folks? All right, great. Let's go to the next slide. Tools and resources jigsaw. This is, go ahead to the next slide, Karina. So we're not going to do an actual activity around this, but just want to kind of have you think about the fact that there's so many different pieces to what goes together, right? To come up with a determination whether or not a mentor would be moved forward to match with a mentee. So it's your case files, right? It's that application and all of those pieces. And it's really important that you have a succinct way of documenting all of this so that you know that you've checked all of your boxes. You want to make sure I's are dotted, T's are crossed, right? How do you know that if you're doing an application and a reference check and the sex offender registry and the BCI, and like, how do you know that each of those components have been completed and what does that look like? We use the Innovative Mentoring Database, which has an entire onboarding portion to it that allows us to track that. So we'll know exactly where a prospective mentor is in that application process. But I know that not everybody has that. Sometimes it's an Excel spreadsheet, sometimes it's, you know, a different type of a database. But how do you make sure that you have all of those pieces? You want to make sure that that interview is consistent. Mel just put in the chat, how do you screen out before you even screen? Can policies be set in place to share with potential mentors that list out what would equate to disqualification to save on screening time and costs? This is something I felt the mentoring program I mentor for was doing. Yeah, if you know that you have to do all of these things, then you might not proceed with your application, right? And that will save on many different levels. I know yesterday there was something that came up around the order in which things are done, right? Do you do the criminal background check first, or is it the interview? Like at what phase is it? Some of it simultaneous. It really does depend on your program resources. We heard from someone yesterday that does everything herself, including the fundraising for the organization. So how do you do that and A, keep track of it all, and B, you know, make sure that, that you're not missing anything. So again, keep in mind, you have tons of tools and resources, and don't forget that that informed intuition is probably going to be your key component to all of it. And that comes up with the case files or the case notes, some way of you making notations of, gosh, yes, this is the reason why, or this is, you know, how this interview went, and being consistent across questions and making sure that when you do an interview, that you have a first line of questions, but then depending on those responses, you're able to kind of deviate a little bit and dig in more, and don't be afraid to do that. Any questions on these tools and resources? All right, let's go to the next slide. So one more slide, please. Next slide. Okay, so now we only have about 7 minutes left. So I'm just going to give you a couple minutes right here to grab a piece of paper and write down 3 learnings and practices that you've heard about today that you know that your agency would benefit from and like to implement. So you're going to grab a piece of paper and write down 3 learnings or practices you will take back to your agency that you would like to implement. Something you're not doing now that you feel like you should be doing, or you want to do. And the checklist is in there again, so if that's helpful, that's great. You also want to add to that list 2 learnings or practices that you already do, but you would like to do better. You would like to strengthen. 2 learnings or practices that you would like to strengthen. And then 1 learning or practice that you want more information about, that kind of intrigued you, that you're not quite sure about, or you'd like more information. All right, while folks are finishing that up, I'm opening it up for questions. What questions do you have? This is a very quiet room. I am not used to this. Please, please, please come off of mute. Speak to me. Christopher, you'll fix this quiet situation very shortly, I'm sure.
Joanne, I was wondering if anyone has policies in place where they have more than one staff member do a standardized interview with a potential mentor so that they can kind of get feedback about, gut feelings from multiple staff members, or if that's just not something that people do.
I think it would be awesome if somebody could do that, Tammy, but my guess is bandwidth wise, it doesn't end up happening, right? Just because of everybody doing so many things with so few resources. Does anybody use multiple people on an interview? We do that for new hires. But probably we should be just as thoughtful about our mentors.
I would do that multiple interview process if I had a question about the person. So I would offer them to come back again for another session. And without discussing with the person that I'm asking to sit on, so they would make their own judgments about that, then I would do it.
That's a great suggestion, Calvin, on an as needed basis.
I missed the question a little bit, but what I'd like to kind of add is here at Mentor Rhode Island, what we do though, is that there's a person in charge of each of the processes. So they're going through about 5 different people at our organization. And then if we ever have a question about somebody, then we can kind of confer at like a team huddle or something. So there's one person that's, recruiting them, one person processing the application, another person doing the interview. I do the training, of course. So there's those different pieces. So different people are seeing them as they're going through. So although there's not a number of people in the interview, different people are touch points throughout.
That's a great idea. Thank you for that.
And I feel like recently we've refused more mentors than we ever have in the past, which I don't know if it's a result of that process or just a result of life in general.
Yeah, Joanne's right with that. We've definitely, through this process and having a few new hires and people looking at them, we've definitely refused more mentors than I've ever seen while we've been here.
Yeah, I interview them myself as the only staff in my program. I using the training to screen and have an additional staff at that training to observe or an intern. I love that. Shalita, I wish that would be awesome. Yeah, it's hard when you're working by yourself, right? Which very often in mentoring programs, you're one program of many within an organization, so we get that. And that's why there's that wonderful information about technical assistance that Mel dropped into the chat, so that you can have co-conspirators with your local mentor affiliates and or technical assistance providing associations. If there's different orgs that have been doing mentoring for a long time that also are doing technical assistance for us. So it's like having your own mentor. I like to say that the affiliates are mentors to the mentor programs. So any other questions before we shift gears? Well, thank you all. I know that's not a fun topic, but it is certainly probably the most important one that we'll cover, because we want to keep our kids safe. Christopher.
All right, everyone, I'm back. I'm ready to rock and roll with everyone this afternoon. Thank you again for having us. Screening definitely isn't the most fun topic, which is why I give it to Joanne, but it's definitely, like she said, the most important when we're really thinking about keeping those mentors safe and having mentors that are suitable for your program. So it's a lot of great information to kind of take in and to process. So we're going to jump into standard 3, which is mentor training. So of course, as we've done with the other sections, I will read through this, unfortunately, and bore you to death. But then we'll dive in a little bit deeper in each of these. We'll do a couple of group activities in this one. So get ready to talk to some group mates about this. And again, kind of get us talking and engaging here. And hopefully I can model for you what are good qualities of a trainer in this section. So I will try to do my best, although it is Wednesday afternoon. And this is a short week for us here in Rhode Island. So I'll see what I can get done for everybody. So standard 3, mentor training benchmarks. Again, benchmarks are things you should be doing in your program to have an effective program. And so the program provides mentors a minimum of 2-hour in-person pre-match training, not an hour and a half, right? Not an hour and 45 minutes, a minimum of 2 whole hours. If a mentor cannot agree to that, then they should not be a mentor in your program. The mentor training includes listed topics at a minimum. Those topics we're going to talk about a little bit later, but are listed in the EEPM 4th edition, so you can look at those there. But again, we will go over those later on. The program provides pre-match training for the mentor on risk management policies that are matched to the program's model settings and population served. Again, we really want to think about this, that each of your programs are different. So really leaning into your goals and objectives for your program will help to have the most effective training. The program uses training practices and materials that are informed by empirical research or are themselves empirically evaluated. What I say this really means is that we didn't make it up. We've done some research here on what makes a good mentor training and what you should include in that mentor training. And then we have our enhancements, and there are lots of enhancements here. So things, again, you don't need to do, but you should do to have an effective mentor training for your mentor program. And so that includes program provides additional pre-match training opportunities beyond the 2 hours in-person minimum for a total of 6 hours or more. I always say you shouldn't go over 6 hours for pre-match training, just because you want to make it easy enough for a mentor to be able to attend. So if it's, one Saturday that they have to go to a training, that's great. If you have them go on 3 Saturdays before they're matched, that might be a little harder. So again, thinking around, you can have whatever standards you want in place for your mentor program, but just realize, what are those barriers we talked about yesterday, right? For a mentor to be a mentor in your program. So that mentor training time sometimes can be a barrier. The program addresses post-match training topics. Again, that's listed in the elements of effective practice. Program uses training to continue to screen mentors for suitability to be a mentor and develop techniques for early troubleshooting should problems be identified. This is part of the screening process, right? That mentor training. And when I was talking about earlier, we were saying, I do the mentor training for the people in our programs. So they come through me and I look at them in that space and how do they interact with one another? How do they answer questions? What does that look like? And that's giving me a chance to see, I've seen a couple of people in the mentor training say some questionable things that required a follow-up, but ultimately that person was not matched in our program. So really, using that space to be able to identify if a mentor is good for your program, the mentor training is really, really good for that, which is why in-person is also really good. Unless it's an e-mentoring program, but really in person, you can get a sense of who a person is, how they interact with other people, and especially a young person. The program provides training for mentees. I always think if you can and you have the ability, always train your mentees, or at least gear them up to understand what is mentoring. And what does it mean to be a mentor? It says my connection is unstable, everyone. I'm sorry. So we want to make sure that, if you're able to train your mentees, that's something that you should be doing. Like I said, at least gearing them up. Program provides training for the mentees on risk management policies that are matched with the program's model settings and population served. Program provides trainings for parents and guardians when appropriate. Again, it may not be appropriate for your program, but getting your parents in the program and guardians to understand what it is that they need to do, and their place in the process is really important there and can be helpful to have a successful mentoring relationship. And the program provides training for parents and guardians on risk management policies that are matched with the program's bonding settings and population served. There you go. So our learning outcomes for this section are, by the end of this session, participants will be able to explain why training mentors leads to effective and safe mentoring relationships, apply adult learning theories and principles of effective training to the design of training sessions, design a training system that teaches mentors and knowledge, attitudes, and skills needed to build an effective and safe mentoring relationship within the program context, recognize the importance of using culturally appropriate language and tools for training program participants, and apply the training standards from the 4th edition of the Elements of Effective Practice to program practices. Again, we're going to dive into all of this very, very soon. So why is mentor training important? We have a little bit of research here that's been done of why it's important. But we want to go back to, why do mentoring relationships fail, right? That mentors perceive lack of mentee motivation. They don't want to be in this program. Why are they in this program? They're not giving 110% of what I think they should be giving, right? So the mentor drops out. Mentors' unfulfilled expectations. It wasn't what you said it was going to be. You said, oh yeah, I have to attend a mentor training. Little did you tell me it was going to be 20 hours of pre-match training, right? Those different things can get a mentor to leave. But what we're looking at here specifically in this case, when we look at mentor training, is those deficiencies in mentors' relational skills, including cultural competency. We want to make sure that in the training, we're able to identify if a mentor can work with a mentee that is different from themselves, comes from a different background. And that doesn't only include race, right? There are so many ways in which we can identify to be different. And so just knowing that a mentor can relate to a mentee who's different from them, that's really what we want to see, and how open they are and non-judgmental. And then of course, we're looking at family interference is another one, which is why, again, that mentor training can be really important for parents and for guardians there to really gear them up. And then inadequate agency support. If you don't provide mentor training, you think, oh, my mentors are fine, right? Inadequate agency support, your mentors will leave you. Sorry to say. So we want to make sure that we are always providing mentor training for at least 2 hours pre-match. So now to dive into that training research. So we have the effects are enhanced significantly when more best practices are utilized, including initial and ongoing mentor training, right? To have an effective program, you want to have initial mentor training, but also ongoing mentor training. There are going to be things that come up that maybe weren't questions when they first started, but now they're going to need help with some specific skill sets. And that's where the ongoing mentor training comes in. The role of risk. Mentors that receive early match training met with their mentees more frequently and were more likely to sustain the relationship for at least 12 months. A number of times when I am working with mentors, they are saying, hey, you know, I want to be a mentor, but is there some type of training or something that I can take beforehand? Absolutely. And it's mandatory. So really looking at that and knowing that we are supporting our mentors and giving them that 2 hours to ask questions, to experience all of that. But then we want to look at mentee and parent and guardian training research. And so it says the training contributes to mentees' understanding of their role and responsibilities and can enhance their commitment to mentoring. So many times, you know, we'll match young people in our programs and we'll say, do you know why you're here? You know, I don't know. Like, you know, Miss Smith said to go down to the cafeteria. And so we have to kind of gear them up right before we meet with a mentor. So to have that time to have them ask questions, really understand what a mentor is and how they can best use a mentor to their advantage, no matter what age or program they're in, is really beneficial to those mentees and sets them up to, again, have a successful mentoring relationship. And then we say parent training is particularly important because parent involvement in and support of the mentoring relationship is associated with positive youth outcomes. If the parent likes the program, right, and is in it and knows what's going on and doesn't feel left in the dark, they're going to want their child to meet with their mentor more, right? They're going to want to get more into that relationship because they understand what this mentor is doing in their life and that it's not replacing the parent, right? We never want that feeling. We never want to feel like we're ostracizing a parent. We want them to be a part of it all And really that family engagement piece is just so, so important, as we've seen in programming, to be successful. Any questions so far on anything? I don't feel like I'm just like chatting away, going at this. We've done a lot of talking today. And I just want to know if anyone has any questions so far about anything we've said. There will be a chance for you to engage a little very shortly. All right, we're going to keep on keeping on. So talking about reaching your audience. And so when we talk about reaching our audience, we're really looking at those adult learning principles. So Corinne, if you go to the next slide for me, please. And so when we talk about principles of adult learning, we're looking at how adults learn. And we are training adults. And so we say that adults learn because they want to. Adults feel they know what they need to know. Like children, they learn by doing. Adults learn when they are comfortable, they're not hungry or cold or tired. Adults want guidance and not competition. And then new material, and adults learn new material into relation of what they already know, right? I feel like I'm not telling you anything that maybe you don't already know, right? But I'm building on your experiences that you've had, right? And you want to make your programs better. And this is how we do that, is kind of through having these conversations and going to trainings like these. So our question on the next slide is, which of these principles appeals to you the most and why? So when actually I have us go back to the slide beforehand. So which of these principles appeals to you the most and why? What I'd love for you to do is I'd love for you guys to write that in the chat now. Which of these adult principles appeal to you the most and why? So if you pick one that really appeals to you, like children learn by doing, yes, absolutely. Learn because they want to. Learn because they want to, learn when they're comfortable. They want guidance and not competition. Want guidance and not competition. Want guidance and not competition because they want to. Learn because they want to. Learn material into what they already know. So what I love by putting this stuff in the chat and really kind of assessing you all as participants here and you as adult learners in this space, right? All of you are hitting on different principles here. So then I, as the trainer, as the facilitator here in the front, need to make sure that I'm hitting all of these spaces and that I'm checking in on you and that I'm making sure that we're learning by doing and that there's guidance and there's not competition, right, within the learning space, and that you are learning because you want to, right? You want to make your programs better. Does anyone want to, I would love it if a couple of people could come off mute and talk a little bit more about that adults, principles of adult learning style and why they picked that one. So if I could have a couple of people come off mute, either raise your hand and I'll call on you, come off.
They'll learn because they want to. To me, it's very important because it shows the openness. It also shows that they understand they don't know everything. And so they're bringing something to the table for sure, but there's a freeness of exchange of ideas and thought process when you have a person that's willing to do that.
Yeah, right. That we all have something to learn. That's definitely a good one there, that, you know, there's always room to grow, right? And there's all of that. Shalita.
Similar in that I feel like learning because they want to is kind of at the top. And then that makes you open and receptive to all of the rest of the things that you're going to look at individuals for guidance. And you're going to be, you know, comfortable, you're receptive. I think when you're open, you're more, even if it's something that you may not like, you're still receptive because you've then worked with this person, you've built a relationship and you know that they're coming with, you know, that they want the best for you. And so you're more receptive. It's like, okay, well, yeah, I could have did that particular thing better, or so I think that's like really what I thought was like most important to me. If I can get a student learning because they want to, then they can help drive where this conversation, activities, and things are going.
Yeah. And that sometimes is a little hard in this space, right? Because most of you were made to come here, right? And you were asked to be here, and maybe you feel like you already know what you need to know. And so, you know, figuring out, all right, well, then how can we use you, right, as people who kind of know what's going on? I'd love for in the chat right now, kind of like I asked yesterday, on a scale of 1 to 5, right? 5 being I am the best trainer in the entire world. I really think I'm a good trainer and that I am great and all of those things. And then 1 is I need some help, right? I need some help in training. And then anywhere in between, where do people fall as far as considering themselves a trainer? And again, I love the diversity of answers, right? We're really a mixed bag of people here that are on this call. You know, I think Joanne can probably tell it better, but we had someone on staff who used to hate to give mentor training. She loved the program piece, but mentor training was just not her thing. Joanne, I don't know if we want to talk more about that person and just like what that was like, kind of going through that with them.
It wasn't easy is what it was like. I think it's just a matter of being comfortable with the fact that you already have a vast reservoir of knowledge that you can tap into. And she was just not comfortable like in her own amount of knowledge around the program. So having been, you know, involved literally for years and still never really getting that comfortableness, if you will, with the training piece, if you can step back and rest in the knowledge of the fact of your experience and realize that the folks that you're actually interacting with are just like you. At one point, you didn't know the information that you currently know, right? And just being able to share and make it more conversational and not trying to be like the sage on the stage, right? How do you make it more interactive and those kinds of pieces? And I think that's something that we've definitely really ramped up in the years following. Did that address what you wanted me to, Christopher?
Yeah, absolutely. So I really like what Shalita said around like 5, right? I have great people skills and can train, but I'm a 1 in this area, right? So it's the content knowledge at this point, right? And that's the biggest thing I tell people all the time, right? You can, if you're probably an amazing trainer, right? You can talk to people, but it's getting comfortable with that material. And once you're able to get comfortable with that, you can train on it. A lot of it is informative, right? People want to know. They're going to have a lot of questions around, you know, just programmatic, you know, what do I do? How do I do this? What's it like if they ask this kind of a question? How many of you would say that your current mentor trainings address the needs of adult learners? Do you feel that your mentors, and you can just put yes or no in the chat, but do you feel like it addresses the needs of adult learners? Great, so we got a lot of yeses. Tammy's saying not well enough. And when we're thinking about those principles of adult learning, we also think about those different learning styles, right? Those 3 learning styles that we're also accustomed to, which is that visual learner, audio learner, right? And kinesthetic learner, and those different places of how we actually take in the knowledge and what works best, right? So we've got slides here up on the screen. We've got the audio piece, right? I'm talking in the background. And if we were, you know, in person, we'd be up and moving around. Though we have a couple of different activities. I've got your fingers moving. We'll do a little bit of group work in a minute, and all those different pieces there. So I think it's really great to have us kind of understand, right, that there are so many adults that learn so many different ways. In the chat again, I'd love for you to just say what kind of learner you are, right? Are you visual, audio, kinesthetic? Which one works for you? And which learner do you feel that you are when you're learning? Kinesthetic, visual. I need all three. So again, knowing as the person in the front of the room that you need to make sure that you're hitting on all these different pieces when it comes to, again, how people engage in learning. Any questions about any of this? All right. So we're going to move on here. We're going to move past this one. So now we're going to move into learning modalities. So now we've talked about, those principles of adult learning. How do adults learn? How do they gather information? What does that all look like? But now this is the way in which the activities and the things that you do in a training, right, should also be mixed up. So we shouldn't all be doing one thing or another, because again, we want to make sure that we're getting all of our learners out all different levels. So different learning modalities might be to think or write individually, right? Do some individual work. I had you do that yesterday. I had you individually sit and write those pitches. You did some pair or group discussion. Another one is group write. I always think this is one where you either write on the big sticky paper in a group, or maybe it's up around the wall and you do a carousel around, right? Doing a group write and adding to more information that's on the sticky note. Maybe you draw or sing or do a kinesthetic technique. There may be simulation or role play. So there are lots of different learning modalities that you can use, and you could use all of these in your mentor training, right? You should be using a lot of this stuff. Think individually, talk to a partner, right? Work together on something. You also can see then how people interact with each other, which is really what you're trying to assess in a mentor training. How do people interact with one another in the best way possible? So I ask you, I'm sorry, can we just go back for a second? I'm gonna ask you a question in the orange box. So what specific activities do you currently use, or could you potentially add to mix up training modalities? So I love for people to come off mute and just say what specific activities you currently use, or could you potentially add to mix up training modalities? Is there one that you feel works really well in your mentor training that people really enjoy? I like that Donna put in the chat that she needs to add more group write. What I think is really great about that is we do one around the Search Institute's developmental framework. I don't know if people are aware of that. And I have people sit down in the mentor training and I have them think about, so what does it mean to be a mentor, right? And how do you do these things in mentoring? So that goes around expressing care, challenging growth, providing support, sharing power, and expanding possibilities. And I say to people, work with your partner, make a list. How do you, as a mentor, express care? What does that look like? Specific examples of what that looks like. So they can walk away with actual tangible things, right, to do as a mentor to make sure that they are implementing the developmental framework. Elisa says, how do people use draw, sing, or kinesthetic techniques? Does anyone use this in their mentor trainings? So Nick is, I was going to say.
I was going to say, actually, I'm surprised that we don't have singing in our mentor trainings, Christopher, since you're the performer in our family.
I am, but I have singing in other workshops of mine. I do like that Nick brought up one of my favorite topics to debate, which is the idea of role play in training. I hate role play in trainings. As someone who actually loves theater and acts on the side, I hate role play in trainings. Show of hands, I would like a thumbs up if you also do not like to role play in trainings. Thumbs up on your screen if you can use your reaction down at the bottom. Thumbs up if you don't like role play. So if I walk into a training and I say, we're going to do role play today, we're going to role play a scenario. All right, so I've got a couple of people who say they don't like role play, right? I prefer scenarios. Someone's saying I hate it in the chat. Like to watch but not be in it. Exactly, right? So there's something about role play for me that I think does a good job, but you need to create that community within a training that takes a little bit of time before you can role play in front of people. I think that people are more nervous about being up in front of people than they are about the actual scenario and how that looks. And so you're not getting all of what you need out of it. Though Nick did also say that I think he gave himself a 4 on the trainer spectrum. And so I would think that he understands that piece around creating that so that he can get the most out of it. And Nick, if I'm speaking for you out of turn, please unmute yourself and let me know.
I was going to say, Chris, perhaps role play comes into play if you're not just yourself, but somebody in your staff, and some kind of question or situation in the training or that the whole group would benefit from. So it'd be almost like as need, not something that you maybe would just hold on to, but if it's really going to help people in the setting and you know that, then you've got a partner that you can do that role play with without putting somebody on the spot. It could be very helpful.
Yeah, and I think that's it, right? Assessing the room, assessing if there's someone there who might be a volunteer, right, in that space with you. And as it comes up, hey, you know, we're talking about this thing and about boundaries. Let's role play some of that. Does anyone want to volunteer to role play with me? You know, and that might be a great one there. So therefore, you're not making everybody role play. Again, I also am a big fan of, if you are going to do that, have them do it in a smaller group, right? Have them maybe role play a scenario or a conversation, and that's a little less than getting up in front of everybody and having to dissect that. Any other thoughts around any of the different modalities? Anything that you've seen really works well? Anything that you use, again, that you see in your mentor training that really works well, that people respond to really well? And again, feel free to unmute yourself. I'd love to hear your beautiful voices. It's okay, Lisa. So there are lots of different ways that, again, we can engage in a mentor training more than lecturing for 2 hours, right up at the front of the room. It's no fun. Even us right now, Joanne and I keep kind of saying like, no one's saying anything, no one's engaging with us, right? And that's the hard part, right? Is you don't know who you're also going to get in the room to be able to engage with you and what that is going to look like in that space. So what we want to do is we want to make sure that we are creating space for people to also be able to say what they need to say within a training. Wonderful. All right. All right, Karina, we're going to stay on this slide. So don't move from this slide. And I'm actually going to put people in groups for this one. And what I want you to do is I want you to, in your group, to come to talk about a time that you went to an amazing training. And what was that person like? What were those qualities of that person in the front of the room from that amazing training that you went to? And we're going to come back and we're going to talk about some of those. All right. So again, I want you to think about a time you went to an amazing training, who that was. If you've been to another one of my trainings, you can choose me. But again, you know, whatever it is, right? And think about those qualities that that person had at the front of the room. All right. So we are going to put you in groups to discuss that and come up with that. And I'm going to give you about 7 or 8 minutes to kind of come up with that list. Okay? Because I think this is really, really important for us to think about.
Christopher, would you like me to begin the breakout or like to?
I would love that.
Alrighty.
There we go. Everybody's back.
All right, everybody is back, ready to rock and roll. So does anyone want to share with me who those people were, right? Or what those trainings were like? Does anyone want to unmute themselves and share? You knew I was going to ask that, right?
I know in our group, we had talked about definitely the high energy folks, but also when people present together and it's not so much I present this part and then you present this part, but instead they're bouncing off of each other. So it kind of gets that like, who's going to talk next type of excitement. So we talked about that in our group.
Great, wonderful. Joanne and I are not doing that. That's not how we roll. We don't have that kind of preparation
That's
time.
okay.
That kind
That's
of lead
okay.
time. No, I'm just kidding, of course. No, that's totally understanding, right? Being able to kind of bounce off of each other in those spaces. That's great. Anyone else, the things that people talked about as far as having what those folks were like, those trainers?
Organization. We thought organization was a good thing. And we also like people that were charismatic and really like enjoyed what they were talking about. Because you could tell when they could bring people into the room, bring them into their conversation, what they were talking about. And the people that didn't, they put you to sleep.
Yeah, right. You gotta love what you're talking about. Janaea, were you gonna say something?
Yeah, kind of like what Ms. Wright was just saying, that, you know, you're highly energetic, but we also talked about humor being important to add into that. We said people who are knowledgeable, but not just that you're knowledgeable, you also care, and you clearly care about what it is that you're talking about. One thing I said too is that I think it's important for trainers to be comfortable with silence, because a lot of times you ask questions and it takes people a second to be able to process and then be able to share. And Donna, who was in our group, she pointed out that that's something we want our mentees, you know, to do as well. And so as mentors, or those of us who are training mentors, that's a good skill, because we'll need to be able to be, you know, just listen and give them time to process their thoughts. So yeah, one of our group members, Brittany, I think it was, she also talked about role playing, but kind of doing it in a subtle way so that you don't realize you're doing it, but you've kind of been roped in. So that's a little bit of what we discussed.
I wanted to add another thing, one that we never really talk about, and that's the room setting. If you're having a meeting, it's so important to have a safe, comfortable setup, whether you're talking about temperature, whether you're talking about seating, some forethought into terms of how many people are going to be there and what the seating needs to look like so they can be comfortable. Because if you're not comfortable, you've almost lost them from the beginning.
Absolutely. That definitely is one of those ones that's kind of overlooked, right? Because we're usually like, well, what's that person, right? And what does that look like? But a person who also knows how to set up the room right, who knows their space. Absolutely. I also like that we talked about relating it to young people earlier, right? And bringing that in. So Donna, thank you for saying that in your group and for bringing that to the forefront. You know, I would love to have sent you all snacks before this, but under OJJDP, we cannot spend any of that money on food. So unfortunately, you know, would have loved to have you have snacks, but that's the caveat there. Anything else? Anything else we talked about for qualities of an effective trainer, or what those people were like?
I think that one more thing, and I'll shut up. I promise you I will. It's so important to have clear objectives that are stated, and at the end of the session, have a review to see and kind of like go back through with the people that are present to see if you hit those objectives. If not, then try to answer their questions so that you know that people are leaving there with what you were hoping they got.
Yeah, people want to know kind of, right, what's going to happen. And we're actually going to talk about that a little bit within this section at the end here, about setting people up to say, hey, here's what's going to happen. Here are the objectives. Here's what's happening. Great. All right. So I'm going to have us go on to the next slide and go to the official list here of qualities of an effective trainer. So it's someone who's prepared, someone who's practiced, welcoming, relevant, innovative, interesting, engaging, flexible. So these are different things that we can think about, but I think what everyone talked about earlier, right? Is it those people who love what they're talking about, who really are engaged in the topic? It doesn't matter how knowledgeable somebody is if they bore you to death. So there's something to be said with that as well when we're talking about those qualities of effective trainer. So what it is it's practicing, right? For those of you who may be training for the first time, practicing and being prepared, right? Being able to answer questions, but also to engage participants, have them engage with one another. Be flexible and knowing that things are going to change, timing's going to happen, and all of those different things. Anything else is around qualities of an effective trainer that anyone would like to add? All right, we're going to move on to the next slide here.
Nothing to add, Chris, but that that relevant one is so critical in terms of whatever content we're talking about, figuring out a way to make it relevant to the audience, so that like the relevant and engaging to me often go hand in hand.
Yeah, you want to make it relevant to who you're in front of, right? We talk about as trainers all the time, you know, we customize to our audience, right? When we're creating trainings and we're in front of people, we want to make sure that we're hitting it to the people that it's going to make sense to, right? And that we're saying stuff when we're talking here. I know some of you have developed programs. I know some of you have brand new programs, right? Some of you have been in the field a long time. Some of you haven't. So again, how do you kind of make sure that everyone feels like they're being talked to in a training like this? And so staying relevant as best you can is really great there. All right, on to our next slide. So when we talk about qualities and effective trainer, right, we want to make sure that we're bringing culture into this and that we all come from different backgrounds, but also how do we explain culture in trainings and how do we get people to be culturally responsive, right? And so with this, we're saying, what is culture? Culture we can define as a way of life, especially as it relates to the social transmitted habits, customs, traditions, and beliefs that characterize a particular group of people at a particular time. It includes the behaviors, actions, practices, attitudes, norms, values, communication styles, language, etiquette, spirituality, concepts of health and healing, beliefs, and institutions of racial, ethnic, religious, or social groups. And culture is a lens through which we look at the world. It is the context in which we operate and make sense of the world. It influences how we process learning, solve problems, and teach. Everyone who is coming into your training is coming with a different background and a different experience, a different lived experience that they're coming into this when it comes to mentoring and how to help the young people that they're serving. And so we really need to be cognizant of that, and that maybe someone's culture doesn't align with what we know or know of that culture and where that person comes from. But it is about asking good questions in your training, getting to know the reason behind why someone said something that they said, right? I know all of you are from all across the country. And so, you know, understanding that is a piece, right, of our culture, and all of those different pieces as well. So now when we talk about choosing topics, there are lots of different topics that we can talk about when it comes to mentor training. And so on the next slide here, we're not going to do this right now, but this is definitely something that you can do a self-assessment of later on when you are by yourselves, right? Sitting after this meeting being like, I just wish there was more time for Christopher to talk about mentor training. So you can take some time. And what I want you to do is circle a concept you already cover in an engaging way. So within the elements of effective practice, you'll see lots of things listed there, lots of different topics. So circle those concepts that you already cover in an engaging way. Underline concepts that you do not cover or need to cover in a more engaging way. And then star, right? Add a star next to a concept you need to learn more about or develop for your program. So this will give you a good understanding of figuring out, what am I doing well? What do I need to add? And as long as we've been doing mentor trainings, right, we update it every few years. What is relevant, right? What's the new stuff that's happening in the field? This field is forever changing. So really looking at what we're saying, how we're saying it, what that looks like, what videos are we using? Are they all relevant, new, and going to engage our audience in the way we want them to engage? Are they giving us the results that we want out of a mentor training? And are people walking away with the skills that they need from the training? So again, I think this is a really good time, to do a self-assessment, to look through this and say, okay, am I doing this the best way that this can be done? And if you need to, you can take a picture of the screen. I'm pretty sure these slides will be sent to you, but I would just do that to, again, get a better understanding of later on, I'm going to sit down and do this activity and really go through my program and my training and say, am I doing it the best that it can be done? Any questions around choosing topics? All right, we're going to pop on to the next slide. So some key questions that go along with that, right? We say, was there anything listed in the elements that surprised you, right? Is there something maybe that's listed there that you didn't think, hey, that's something I should have in a mentor training? What could you add or remove from a list? Again, you want to customize it for yourself. So everything that's listed there may not be something that you need in your mentor training, specific to your programs, models, and goals, right? We want to look at our specific models and goals. We also talked about that there are different supplements for different forms of, for different models of program. So a group mentor training and how you would train those mentors is different than how you would train one-on-one community, how you would train one-on-one school, how you would train peer mentors. So really look through that and make sure that it's good for your program and what you're hoping to get out of it again at the end. What do you want your mentors to know when they walk away from those 2 hours? What is the most ideal information that you want them to know? I will ask this last question to the group of why is it important to teach all participants about policies, procedures, program rules, and expectations versus solely relying on handouts and manuals? Can either unmute yourself or write in the chat for this one. But why is it important to teach all participants about policies, procedures, program rules, and expectations versus solely relying on handouts and manuals?
So important because you know that it's been covered and that in terms of liability otherwise, but also you're able to answer questions at that point if there's questions about it. So that it's about laying the foundation to move forward and you're sure that everybody's got that same information.
Right? You know that everyone got the same information. If I say it out loud, you all heard it. Maybe you all took it in a little differently, but you all heard it. It's not like those terms of agreement that you all say that you read, but you didn't really read, right? If I give you a handbook and I give you handouts, are you really going to take those home and read them? Are you? As much as you love to read, I don't know about that. So I think going over it in a group can really be helpful again for what we're doing and how we're trying to get the information across. Because you don't want to make any assumptions or misinterpretations, right? Get to read on your applicants with the feedback of participation, ongoing screening, absolutely. Important information should be reinforced and explicitly shared. So important. All right. Yeah, you want everyone to be on the same page. You want everyone to understand that information and take all that information in. And we never want to assume anything. All right, we're going to move on to the next slide. So activity samples, although we're not going to do too much around activity samples as we are just running out of time, what we are going to talk about is really what I think is so important. And it's those icebreakers and introductions. We talked about yesterday, we did that icebreaker and people said, that was fun. I really enjoyed talking to people from across the country. Wow, that was really cool. It's nice to see what we had in common. That was nice. And we didn't do an icebreaker today and everyone was all quiet. Right? So what does that go to show you? That when we give you time to interact with one another first, how that opens up the room, right? You feel like you know people, you feel like you can trust people. There's something about building relationships. And I think that icebreakers do a really good job of doing that if they're done correctly. And so you get a sense and a feel for the group, right? Who are talkers? Who are funny people? Who likes to crack jokes? Who can I vibe with in this training? Get people moving, engaged, and invested. You start bonding and collaborating, and it sets the stage for a participatory learning experience, right? We want you to participate. Tomorrow will be different. We will not have all of this quiet today, tomorrow, right? We're gonna participate. We will start off with an activity. We will start off with something to get you moving. Well, not moving, because I can't make you do anything from across the country. But so I just think that that's really important. And I think you can see today, if you've been here yesterday and you came back today, how different it's been without that activity in the beginning. Also, I don't want to blame anything, but Joanne did start this off. Just throwing it out there. All right, so moving on to the next slide.
We did discuss whether or not we were going to do an icebreaker, though.
We did. That was a discussion.
I'm
I
not
said,
taking that one all on my own.
I said, we don't have time. We have too much to discuss, too much to cover. All right, agenda design, last thing. And this is really talking about those objectives for the training, right? What's going to happen? Oh, I'm sorry. That's just, it just says agenda design. I have nothing else for you there. But you really want to make sure that you have an agenda out there, right? Let people know what's going to happen, what's going to go on. I think then it gives people a good idea and understanding of what's going to happen, what's coming next, what do I expect, how many times are we going to do a group activity? And it's not so much of a surprise. So I think the way you design your agenda can be really, really important. And whether or not you put that in your PowerPoint, you hand out an actual physical agenda, you just say it out loud. There's something to be said about letting participants know what's the flow, where are we going, what are we going to talk about, and all of that. All right. Yes, particularly for adults. Exactly. People want to know. They want to know what the game is and how to play it. Great. So we can go on to this last slide here. And any questions around mentor training? I mean, we can talk about anything. If you had a question about screening that came up, but any questions around mentor training that we didn't discuss, we didn't hit on. Like, Christopher, gosh, I just really have this really burning question I need to tell you, and I'd love to answer it. You just want to come off mute and say, hey, Christopher, hey, how are you? Ask me how my day is.
That's like the worst thing. And that's horrible.
Okay, phenomenal. Any other questions? Anything else? I got that mute button real fast, everybody. All right. Okay, I'm going to turn it back over to Mel.
Okay. And I've been popping things into the chat if folks have been seeing that. NMRCTA is there for you all. If you're OJJDP grantees, it really looks good to your program manager if you connect to the NMRC through TA. It is like a really big deal. They really do like it. And they're trying to figure out more ways to get you all engaged. If you're a regular program, not funded by OJJDP, please, it's there for you too. We support grantees, we support regular programs. I also put in some training materials into the chat as well. The NMRC website is, just a great resource for y'all. And I just want to make sure that, we're promoting it, and I'm going to push it every day. But it's also, just it's a value add to your program. We've been around for 10 years, and we just, this year we have a $2.8 million grant that's there to support you all. It's for you all. And I just want to make sure that I'm getting that across. But yeah, I don't want to belay my time here. Just know that, we're here for you. And I look forward to seeing y'all tomorrow for the conclusion of this webinar series.
Thank you all for hanging in there with us. Tomorrow's 3 topics. We will be doing an icebreaker, but 3 topics, so come prepared to learn. We're excited.
And thank you, Christopher and Joanne. You always are remarkable trainers, so I appreciate y'all. I'm going to stop the recording now.